Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening from where you're joining us today. Welcome to the CSE Development in Action webinar. Today's webinar is on using feminist evaluation to shift power dynamics in international cooperation initiatives. And I'm pleased to welcome our speaker today. We have with us Commonwealth alumnus, Dr. Carol Miller. Dr. Carol is a 1986 Commonwealth Scholar from Canada, and she completed her MSc in Political Sociology from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Currently, Carol is a long-time gender equality activist, a researcher and evaluator. She is a senior associate and past co-executive director of Gender at Work, an international feminist knowledge network, where she leads on the monitoring, evaluation, and learning aspect of the organization. Uh, Dr. Miller is also the co-founder and director of Changing Minds, which is a Canada-based mental health not-for-profit organization. Dr. Miller is a well-published author. She has published widely on gender equality and women's rights, including several publications on gender transformative and feminist evaluation, which she will be sharing with us today during the webinar. So without any further delay, I would now like to invite Dr. Miller to deliver her webinar presentation and also take in any questions after the webinar presentation. Over to you, Dr. Miller.
Okay. Thanks so much, Evangeline. I'm really pleased to be with you today and grateful to the CSC alumni team for inviting me to speak with you. I'm looking forward to the webinar and then to the session at the end. I'd love to carry on and have some further conversations with you. Yeah, just to begin, a little bit about me. Well, as Evangeline has she's given some context for where I come from, the work that I've done, but just wanted to first of all acknowledge that I did complete my graduate studies with a generous funding of a Commonwealth scholarship, and I understand that many of you today are also doing your research thanks to the Commonwealth scholarship. So congratulations to all of you as well. I started my career after doing my graduate research with the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and I just wanted to, place my career in context, as it were, in that I started out as an evaluator, a social development evaluator, working, in the development sector, and I gradually merged into, or sort of transformed myself into an evaluator. And so today I'm going to really speak to my experience from the perspective of the work I do around monitoring, evaluation, and program learning. So I've worked with many different types of organizations, in addition to the organizations that I have been directly involved in as a director or a researcher. I have worked with a number of bilateral agencies, women's rights organizations, and research institutes to really think about how we bring a feminist perspective to research and evaluation. And so today I'm really focusing on learning from practice rather than any research I've done. And I want to start with just a bit of positionality, putting myself into the space. So as you know, as you can see, I'm a white woman. I'm based in the global north. I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. Well educated, and I acknowledge that brings certain privilege and a certain lens to the work I do. I'm a social justice advocate, feminist, and a mental health advocate. Today, I just want to share a bit with you about my work in evaluation, specifically feminist evaluation. So whether they realize it or not, evaluators are in a unique position to shape progress towards gender equality. And that's what I want to talk to you a bit about today. In recent years, evaluations have increasingly integrated more gender responsive approaches and feminist approaches. And my take, and shared by many in the sector, is that to contribute to transformative change, evaluation needs to be more intentional and indeed advocacy oriented in how we conduct our evaluations. And the same can be said about development research. So I'm going to talk a bit today about why evaluators need a more feminist mindset to tackle issues of inequality more effectively. And then together we can look at how we can improve evaluations to make sure we hear the unheard, see the unseen, and include the excluded using a feminist evaluation approach. So I'm just going to move to the next slide here and just give you an overview of the session. So I'm going to talk about what is feminist evaluation, why feminist evaluation is a useful approach to take, and why now, why in this particular context that we're in. I'll give you a few examples of what feminist evaluation looks like in practice from work that I've been involved in. And then I want to end with just some reflections on, and these are my perspectives on how shifting power dynamics in the development sector can be supported using feminist evaluation. And then, we'll do the Q&A after that. And as Evangeline said, please do pop your questions into the chat box, as we can come back to them as we go along. So let's move along to, oops. Doesn't want to move to what is feminist evaluation, sorry. Oh, okay, we're starting with the poll. We'll start with the poll. There's a first poll here. Would you describe yourself as a researcher? Yes, no. Would you describe yourself as an evaluator? Just want to get a sense of who's in the room today. Thanks, I can see the results coming in. Okay, I'll just give it a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds, see if a few more of you will respond. Okay, I think maybe we'll share the results now. And I'm pleasantly surprised to see that while many of you, of those of you who've taken the survey, there are about 27, 20 of you describe yourself as a researcher, and then 9 describe yourself as an evaluator. So I'm pleased to see that, because it's great to know that I have some fellow evaluators in the space, and that will help me to frame what I'm talking about, and also excited to hear the kind of feedback that you share about your experience being as evaluators as well. So I'll stop sharing. I don't know if I've shared the results or not, but I've spoken to them. Share results are here.
I've just stopped sharing now.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay, and then there's a second part of the poll that we'll do now. And I need to move it along. Okay, the second poll is, how familiar are you with feminist evaluation approaches? And how familiar are you with feminist research approaches? I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, well, it's great to see that we have some of you are familiar with feminist evaluation approaches, about 30%. 70% not at all familiar. So we hope that you'll learn something today from the talk. And for those who are already somewhat familiar, look forward to hearing from you whether the session increased your knowledge or opened up other questions for you about what it means to do feminist evaluation. And I see that 48% are somewhat familiar with feminist research approaches. Oh, the number's going up, 48%, and 48% are not familiar with feminist research approaches. I'll stop sharing, but what I really want to emphasize is that there is a lot of overlap and continuity between feminist research and feminist evaluation. So when we're discussing feminist evaluation today, I hope that those of you who aren't evaluators but are researchers can bring from what we're talking about today to see whether it's relevant or useful, for your own practice as researchers. So I'll move on now to a little bit more about what feminist evaluation actually means. Okay, so this slide is I hope you can see it. I know the text is a bit small, but it is exploring the 8 feminist tenets. So these are the 8 principles that are really the capture what it means to do feminist evaluation. And so I'll just go through them quite quickly and maybe give an example as I'm going through them of what each of them means. So the first is the acknowledgement that evaluation is a political activity. So evaluators' personal experiences, their perspectives and characteristics, and where they come from lead to a particular political stance. And you probably have already noted from the introduction that I come from a social activist background. I bring a certain sense of feminist values to all the work that I do, and social justice values. So, and I am located in the global north. So those sorts of how I'm positioned actually has an impact on how I do evaluation, and I bring that into my practice as an evaluator. And this is pretty typical of those who are practicing feminist evaluation. The context is absolutely key, and I know if you are a development researcher or evaluator, how central context is for any work that you do. It's very difficult to work in this sector today and not be aware of the need to take very context-specific approaches and understand that contexts are different and social norms are different in different contexts, and we need to be aware of that in the work that we're doing. Feminist evaluation generates and uses knowledge as a powerful resource. And this is really, I'll come back to this in the concrete examples, but evaluation when you're using a feminist lens is to create knowledge and findings and information that can be used to advance social justice causes. So it comes with a very specific orientation around how knowledge is power, and the knowledge from evaluation is a powerful resource that can be used. Feminist evaluation respects multiple ways of knowing, and this means bringing in different ways of understanding, different forms of knowledge, different perspectives, and in practice, this means taking a very mixed method approach to doing evaluations and ensuring that different voices and perspectives are brought into evaluation. Oops, sorry, I've just moved the slide forward. Another key principle in feminist evaluation is just beginning with the understanding that research methods, institutions, and practices are social constructs. And so everything that we're doing in terms of applying our methods and tools need to be done with a very critical understanding that each of our methods and approaches come with a lot of baggage in terms of who is using them, who constructed them, what knowledge paradigms they're based on. And I'll come back to that in a moment too. This is someone asked, or actually a few of you asked in the questions in advance of the webinar, and thank you for those questions about why are we focusing only on feminism. And I think one of the really important things here to note is that a feminist lens really understands gender equalities as just one manifestation of social justice. And we understand that discrimination is intersectional, it cuts across race, class, and culture, and that these all need to become part of the lens through which we undertake evaluation. Another key thing, and this won't be of any surprise to many of you working in development, evaluation, and research, is that it's really central to take a perspective that sees gender and other forms of discrimination as systemic and structural. So we need to look at the root causes of gender inequality or other forms of inequality as we're doing our evaluations. And then finally, we use feminist evaluation. We use the process of evaluation, not just the outcomes of evaluation. We use a process of evaluation to really engage all of those who are involved in the evaluation as an opportunity to advance social change in the context of doing evaluation. And I'll give some examples of what that looks like when I come to how evaluation has been used practically in the work that I've done. So just move on to the next slide. Let's see. Oops. Sorry, I think I've jumped twice. Okay, breaking it down. So the feminist tenets seem quite abstract in some ways, and there actually has been a lot of work over the last, I'd say 15 years, to move from a description of feminist evaluation as a set of principles to actually what does that mean in practice. And this slide really captures some of what that actually means, like what does it mean to do feminist evaluation? How do we move from those principles to very practical approaches to how we do evaluation? And so one thing I want to emphasize is that feminist evaluation it really brings a way to think about evaluation. It's not a specific set of methods and tools. And people often ask me, can you tell me how, what are the feminist evaluation methods? And to be honest, there are no specific feminist evaluation methods. Feminist evaluation draws on mixed method approaches using multiple methods, from outcome harvesting to surveys, to key informant interviews, focus group discussions, participatory video, multiple methods. It doesn't have a specific set of methods, but it brings an orientation to how we enter into and think about evaluations and the kinds of questions that we ask in evaluation. Feminist evaluation also encourages reflection, empowering and collaborative and participatory processes. So as I mentioned in the last slide, that as we're developing evaluations and the kinds of methods we use during the evaluation, we really engage the actors in building, critical thinking, taking moments to reflect on their experiences of power and documenting that as part of the evaluation, even strengthening capacity to do like participatory video, for example, as part of the evaluation process. So not only are they those who are involved in the program able to use a specific method like participatory video to capture their stories of change, but they're also learning a method that they can use after an evaluation for continuing to do their advocacy work using, clips of videos that were developed for the evaluation. And this just the third point really reinforces what I've just said. The evaluation process and what kind of space for reflection and learning that an evaluation process creates is as important as the findings or the outcomes of the evaluation from a feminist evaluation lens. Feminist evaluation provides a platform for women's voices and others who are usually unheard to be heard, more clearly, and their voices are amplified. And feminist evaluation takes an activist stance, and this is something that has been really quite an interesting conversation to have when you're putting evaluation, when you're approaching a client or an organization or trying to do advocacy work around why it's useful to use feminist evaluation with, with a donor agency, for example, with civil servants who say, well, we can't use feminist evaluation because we're civil servants and we can't take an activist stance. And there's some very, very interesting conversations that happen around that. And when I get to the slide on some work with Global Affairs Canada, I'll talk a little bit more about that sort of dilemma that one is faced with when one takes on feminist evaluation. Someone asked the question, what's the difference between feminist evaluations and other evaluations? So again, thank you for that great question. And I'm just going to take a moment maybe to respond to that now, because I think it's useful to talk about it in the context of, breaking this down. So in many cases, or in some cases rather, feminist evaluation is not really different from some other approaches to evaluation. Feminist evaluation fits within the branch of evaluation that's called social justice branch, and that includes other approaches like Indigenous evaluation, equity-centered evaluation, LGBTQI evaluation, critical race theory as an approach to evaluation. And all of these really focus primarily on viewpoints of marginalized groups and interrogate systemic power structures, usually through mixed methods, to further social justice and human rights. So it's not dissimilar to many other forms of evaluation. However, particularly, and I'm speaking here from someone who's worked, for many years with in the development sector with donor organizations, the evaluation approaches that are used tend to favor certain types of methods and approaches. There's emphasis on rigor, neutrality, objectivity, a strong concern with bias, and bias that could be, the methods could bring to the evaluation. An external use of external evaluator at arm's length from the program, and all of that is valued much more highly over experiential knowledge of those who are involved in the program, what we typically call beneficiaries, and those who are actually, have lived experience to share. We often sort of miss digging in more deeply to surface and give them voice when we use more quantitative methods rather, or use quantitative design, quasi-experimental design, or RCTs, which, as those of you who are researchers and evaluators in the development sector will know, are still considered the gold standard for evaluation and research. The other thing that's different about doing feminist evaluation, or many of these social justice approaches to evaluation, is that often there's a default to Northern experts who are knowledgeable in using, quasi-experimental and experimental design. So it's often said that it's harder to find Southern evaluation teams or, evaluators who are based in the global south with the right skills. So again, it creates a dynamic that excludes certain people, certain methodologies, and certain approaches from how evaluation is done typically. But we can come back to this in the conversation because, these are all contested and dilemmas that are, ones that we're all thinking about and when we're working in evaluation in the development sector. So I'll move to slide 8 now. So when to use feminist evaluation? You can use feminist evaluation anytime, in any evaluation. However, the reality is that to date, and when I say to date, I'd say, in the development sector, of feminist evaluation has really only been talked about and offered as an approach for the past sort of 15, 16 years. So in those 15, 16 years, since I started working in trying to promote and advocate for the use of feminist evaluation, it's mainly been used for evaluation of international development programs and projects that focus on gender equality and women's empowerment outcomes. And you'll see this, the 2 examples that I'm going to share with you in a moment are really from those sectors. Evaluations, it's been used for evaluations that are interested in understanding complex, nonlinear social change initiatives like, women's rights initiatives. And it tends to be used by women's rights organizations, some international NGOs, and 1 or 2 feminist donors. And I'll give an example from Global Affairs Canada in a moment. So there's not huge uptake. And this is, part of my ongoing advocacy in terms of trying to convince donors and other organizations to use feminist evaluation. And the reason why is that my perspective and perspectives of those who I work with often in the development sector are really trying to promote and advocate for the use of feminist evaluation in the current context. And there are a few things that are happening right now that are that really open up some space for doing feminist evaluation. And maybe I'll begin, I think it's the next slide is a poll. And these are the context of feminist evaluation, in 2024 is, we hear about feminist foreign policies. We hear a lot about locally led development. We hear a lot about decolonization and the discourses and practices related to that. And we are also hearing, sadly, more and more about the backlash against women and LGBTQI rights. So this is kind of the context in which we're, working right now. And I want to just, I think we have a poll here a fun poll about feminist foreign policies. Let me just move it to the next. Oops. Okay. Which of these countries does not have a feminist foreign policy currently? Okay, I'll just give you another second or 2. Okay, well, interestingly, the responses are still coming in. Okay, the poll's ending. Interestingly, most of you, 53% said Mexico. In fact, Mexico, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Canada have feminist foreign policies. United Kingdom does not, although latest check is that the Labour Party is proposing that they have a feminist foreign policy as part of their election manifesto. So just the reason I'm raising feminist foreign policies, all localization, decolonization, is that there's a lot of emphasis in all of these agendas. It's about shifting power and doing things differently. I'm going to stop sharing the poll. And I'll just go back to slide. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so I have some definitions here. I'm not going to read them out, just for any of you who are not familiar with the terms localization or decolonization. I've just captured a couple of definitions. These are contested concepts, and many of the concepts that I'm talking about today are contested concepts. Development itself is a contested concept. So just wanted to put the feminist foreign policy, localization, decolonization, and the context of the backlash really creates an incentive, a motivation, space, as I said, for doing things differently. Feminist foreign policy, if you've got one in your country, and I'm fortunate enough to have be living and working in Canada that has a feminist foreign policy. Whatever you say about the pros and cons of feminist foreign policy, whether they're working, not working, whether you're skeptical about feminist foreign policy, same can go with localization and decolonization. The reality is that it creates a framework for accountability. It creates space for trying to do things differently, for shifting power, for rethinking some of our knowledge and paradigms and strengthening impact. So I'm going to move now to give, because I'm aware that I've spoken a lot. I'm going to move to some concrete examples from my practice of using feminist evaluation. So I'm drawing on two examples, one from a Power Up program, which is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Netherlands. It's part of a consortium of 3 women's rights organizations who are a mix of Global South and Global North organizations. The focus of the program is feminist movement building and advocacy, 17 countries and 3 regions, and it's an $11 million program over 5 years. Just coming to an end in a year and a half. And then the Women's Voice and Leadership Program is Global Affairs Canada's flagship program under its Feminist International Assistance Policy. And it's a 180 million commitment over 5 years, works with 32 bilateral projects in 5 countries, and it provides direct multi-year core funding and capacity strengthening to local women's rights organizations. And just about a year ago, this program was renewed by the Government of Canada for another 195 million, and it will be an ongoing program of the government. So my comments about these 2 programs, I'm a consultant who works with these programs. I've worked with them very, very closely for 5 or 6 years, but I just want to note that anything I'm sharing about them is from public available information, not anything that is, it's all information that you can also access to and not representing the organizations. So let's move to the next slide. So just to give some examples of what it means to actually focus on power, systemic changes that demonstrate shifts in power. It's not easy to measure power and power shifts, but I'm just giving one example here from the Power Up program, that even the indicators that are used help us to sort of tease out the kinds of changes that are happening. So we're not only looking at sort of descriptive statistics about health, outcomes or things that are easier to measure, like levels of education and that sort of thing, which are all important, but are easier to measure. Let's be frank about that. So in the Power Up program, we're looking at and trying to find, as we're implementing the program and evaluating the program, the number of times that women's rights organizations succeed in creating spaces for feminist demands and positions. The other thing we're looking at, so that's quantitative, then the qualitative indicator, we're looking at women's perceptions that power actors, narratives, attitudes, and behaviors have shifted or improved in relation to the thematic areas of the program. Another example that comes from the Power Up program is we just completed, well, almost 6 months ago, we completed the midterm review for the Power Up program. And we, just as an example of how, feminist evaluation and practice, we used, multiple methods, mixed methods. And among those included storytelling workshops and some art-based data collection that created the space for those participating in the program. And I hesitate to use the word beneficiary, those participating in the program, to really tell their stories of their experience of the Power Up program, what, through art, through storytelling, narratives, through recording, just to capture and surface their voices and their sense of what's changed. And I'll just give you one example of that in the next slide. So these are two quotes that come from, the first comes from a part of the Power Up program in Malawi there. And I should just note, I think maybe it doesn't appear here, but the Power Up program works with women who are non-binary as well. So we use the term women. I think it's in the last slide. Let me just go back, just so I didn't mention it back in the previous slide. Women with an X is just a reference to women who are non-binary, and they are, we do a lot of work with LGBTQI queer groups in this program. Sorry, skip forward to the change stories. So the first one is from a participant in Malawi, and she participated in the Our Body, Our Lives critical feminist analysis program or activities that were implemented by Power Up. And it was a program that was used, or a methodology rather, that was used in response to the cyclones in Malawi. And it enabled the women to adapt outside of the government structures and to really bring their work to the notice of the government in disaster relief. And again, I won't read out the quotes, but just take a moment to imagine this woman from Malawi talking about how power has shifted for her. And then the second is from Pekka. Pekka is again one of the partners of the Power Up program, and this is a quote from data that was collected through the midterm review through one of the art. There was art and storytelling, and again, this is the opportunity for this woman from Pekka, which is a organization of women-headed households, to talk about the experience of the training that she received in rights and advocacy, and enabling how they describe themselves as normal women to engage in advocacy with the government. And that's shifted. That's one of the key power shifts for the women in Pekka, they've been able to advocate directly with municipal government to secure additional resources for their work. Okay, I'll move on quickly to the WVL Women's Voice in Leadership program. This is just an example of a framework that was used to actually take those the 10 feminist principles and go through in a very intentional way with the evaluation team at Global Affairs Canada to think about how they bring each of those principles into practice in their design of the evaluation. And I think that, really important thing here is I was not directly I was not on the evaluation team. This is an evaluation of a program that I have been taking a lead role in the development of the MEL framework. And one of the things that's really significant from my perspective is how the Women's Voice in Leadership program was seen as an opportunity by Global Affairs Canada to try feminist evaluation. And that involved a lot of advocacy work, like 6 or 7 years of advocacy work by internal advocates and external advocates to try and use the feminist international assistance policy as an opportunity to do something different. And kudos to the evaluation team at Global Affairs Canada, because they took a very intentional approach. They went through the design, setting up a reference group that included stakeholders from women's rights organizations, as well as feminist evaluation experts and internal Global Affairs staff to be part of the team that designed and agreed the evaluation questions, methods. The data was used from using multiple sources, really mixed methods with very deep dive case studies. They made an effort to use local evaluators, local researchers to collect the information rather than having Global Affairs staff do the evaluation in country. And I think that's a really, again, significant sort of shift in terms of how feminist evaluation really values the local context and the need to support local evaluators to do evaluations in contexts in which they are more familiar rather than, top down. The whole process really encouraged a huge amount of reflection and learning, both inside and outside Global Affairs on the Women's Voice and Leadership program, what difference it was making, as well as development practice and the systems and processes that are supporting or hindering how programs like the Women's Voice and Leadership program was implemented. And just an example of this, one of the evaluation questions, and I come back to feminist evaluation, it's not necessarily anything completely different than what you're doing in evaluation, but the questions you ask are very important. And one of the questions of the Women's Voice and Leadership evaluation was to determine if and to what extent the department, as Global Affairs, was fit for purpose to actually support feminist programming. And one of the key findings of the evaluation was, and this is of a finding of an internal corporate evaluation team. An evaluation was led by Global Affairs, and the conclusion was one of the major challenges was that the corporate processes and systems of Global Affairs Canada are not sufficiently fit for purpose for feminist programming. And so there's huge implications. This finding has had significant implications in terms of encouraging Global Affairs to think about how to shift some of those systems and processes to make the programs more likely to support the objectives, which is to get money and power to local women's rights organizations. I could say a lot about the WVL program, but I'm going to stop now and just move to the final reflections because I know I've used up most of the time. So finally, I think someone asked about shifts. Are shifts someone in the questions asked about shifts? Are shifts enough to really change power relations? And I would like to reflect on feminist evaluation from the perspective of feminist evaluation. thinking about creating the environment to even do feminist evaluation and to support the kinds of social justice outcomes that feminist evaluation is part of, and the whole social transformation around gender equality, around human rights, around social justice. It requires systemic shifts, and that is about rethinking evaluation and research paradigms. What counts as knowledge? What methods are considered rigorous enough? What quality looks like? And also rethinking of development paradigms. And I could also share a lot more about. There are many people thinking about, how do we upend the whole approach to development cooperation, and that's not the purpose of this conversation today. But I just want to put the power that feminist evaluation has to contribute to really thinking about how do we put power in the hands of those who are most implicated in the programs being evaluated, is like really, really central to the whole feminist approach. And I think we need to have a lot more strategic partnerships and advocacy with those who are working in other contexts to shift how we do evaluation, how we shift there are those who are decolonizing evaluation, localizing evaluation. I think feminist evaluators need to be working more closely with them. I'll stop now and hand it back to Evangeline, and I'll move it to the next slide. Okay, thanks.
Carol, feel free to go back to the resources slide if you would like to share that information.
Okay, oops. Oh, sorry. So I've shared a few resources. These mainly speak to feminist evaluation, but yeah, I would take a look at Rethinking MEL. For those of you who are interested in what's different about traditional MEL and or traditional evaluation in MEL and feminist evaluation, that's a good starting point. There's a table there that sort of lays out the difference. For those who are interested in thinking about feminist research, what's different about feminist research, the ActionAid number 5, ActionAid is a resource, is a very good resource. And if you want to know more about Global Affairs work on feminist evaluation, the point 6 is a great way to be immersed in aware of some of the work that's going on at Global Affairs Canada on feminist evaluation. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Carol. Well, I hope you have all enjoyed listening to the work mentioned by Dr. Miller. I would, a bit conscious about time, so I will dive straight into the Q&A session. If we can move to the next slide, please. Great. As Dr. Miller mentioned, thank you to all those who have shared questions in advance via the registration form. What I will do is I will start with the questions that we have received in advance and then gradually move to the questions that will be sent in the chat box. So with that, that's a cue for you to send in all your questions for Dr. Miller in the chat box. So Carol, if you are ready, can I start with the first question?
Yes, please.
Great. So the first question is, how can feminist discourse address gender dynamics with a post-colonial lens?
Okay, that's a really important question. And what I was trying to share in the presentation is that there is a lot of there's a lot of energy right now around using different ways of doing evaluation as part of that broader broader conversation about decolonization. And so again, I'm coming at this from the perspective of an evaluator. So I am really excited and engaged in many of the conversations that are happening around decolonizing evaluation. So there are huge opportunities here for joining forces and really trying to use these more like shifting paradigms, like even thinking about, bringing African feminist theory to our evaluation approaches, to our, how we're doing even our programs, trying to bring those perspectives and, that critical thinking to bear on the feminist evaluation. And I just want to, I probably don't have any in the resources list, but there are many great examples of maybe list out one here I have on my desk is equity-centered evaluation of international cooperation efforts, the urgent need to shift unfair power dynamics. You can find this if you, it's Global Change Center Praxis UK, and it looks at ways in which we need to be joining forces around feminist evaluation, Indigenous evaluation, decolonized perspectives, African theory on evaluation, and really challenge the paradigms that are underpinning how we do development and therefore how we do evaluation.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is, what is your understanding on the application of feminist evaluation in higher education settings, especially in the context of institutional assessments?
That's a great question. And I do a lot of work around working with research institutes, for example, on how we bring a gender transformative lens to do both the work of the organization, the work that research institutions or development or education institutes are doing, and also their internal culture. And I think one of the things that I would say specifically to that is, we rely a lot on in institutional assessments on surveys and on just looking at the data, the quantitative data, which is important. But I think if we brought a feminist lens to it, we would be expanding the questions and the kinds of data we'd be collecting to really get at what's underpinning that the quantitative data that we see, where there's definitely discrepancies in who's getting, who's graduating, who's getting the postdocs, who's, from a diversity perspective, we know the data is skewed. There's, there's inequalities. So a feminist lens would really try to get at much more what's underpinning, those, the data and what underpins the inequality that the data is showing.
Great. The next question is around the term shift. So that word shift in relation to power, keeping this in mind, aren't we risking replicating the very systems and structures that we want to move away from?
Yes, it's an excellent question. And this might be a conversation we could carry on in the networking portion.
Yep.
Because I think it's a question of what do we do? What opportunities are there to do things differently? And so shifts can mean big shifts or little shifts or big shifts, and there may be an opportunity here for big shifts to happen through combining or joining forces with those who are interested in feminist evaluation and Indigenous evaluation and a critical race evaluation, African feminist approaches to evaluation, to really shift the power that is underpinning the whole international development system. And so I totally take the point that shift may be, may only nudge us slightly in a certain direction, and it may not be enough. And again, I can commend to you a book that I have here sitting on my desk by a very dear friend of mine. If you Google her name is Thamreez Khan. She's from Pakistan. It's Khan, and she is an advocate of complete upending of the whole concept of international development, stop development. Like we do, Southern countries do not need international aid. So it just, maybe we can carry on that conversation.
Sure,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I'm just looking at the questions in the chat box now. There's a question on what kind of theories inform feminist evaluation? Are there theories that influence feminist evaluation?
Yeah, that's again a great question. And it probably depends on who is doing the evaluation. And feminism is a very diverse, broad church. There are lots of different approaches to feminism. And so I've had an interesting conversation with a feminist evaluator who would argue and argues that she takes a positivist, feminist, empiricist approach to her evaluation. And so she promotes, a quantitative quasi-experimental design, and that's the lens she's coming from, and from her feminist, the feminist theory and the thinking that she uses to guide her approaches. Then there's liberal feminists. So I think and social, Marxist feminists. I think there are definitely different theories, but I think typically what you find in those who are practicing feminist evaluation is that they really focus on those sort of 8 feminist tenets and principles, and really use those to guide how they're doing evaluation. So yes, there is some feminist theory behind it, but a specific feminist theory may depend on the evaluator and the feminist lens or feminist sort of school of thought that they are specifically located in.
Great. I am wary of the time. There are 2 questions in the chat box. I think we'll quickly go through them.
Sure.
How does the feminist evaluation help us to understand the way in which you're doing research beyond the gender agenda?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I mean, in practicing feminist evaluation, for example, when feminist evaluators from Global Affairs Canada, or evaluators from Global Affairs Canada, use feminist evaluation lens, they bring in a gender-based analysis plus lens as well, which ensures that they're looking at intersectional dimensions of discrimination, of oppression. So they're bringing that lens, layering it, over the feminist evaluation lens that they're using. And, feminist evaluation is meant to be intersectional. You've heard the quote, "My feminism is intersectional." And sometimes, we all acknowledge that looking at the full spectrum of intersectional identities as you are undertaking research and evaluation, some identities get lost. So I think there also needs to be, when you're beginning an evaluation, you do that contextual analysis to understand what are the key sort of intersection identities that are most important to focus on as you're doing the evaluation for that specific context and for that specific program that you're evaluating. And so you need, but I will totally admit that and acknowledge that it's often harder to put intersectional analysis in doing evaluation and in doing research into practice all the time, and we need to be better at that.
Great. All right, so I think with that, I will end the Q&A session. I appreciate all the questions that have come in via the chat box. We will try to maybe discuss these questions, one or two of these questions in the post webinar networking session as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Carol Miller, for this wonderful presentation on your work and on feminist evaluation approaches and why this is important. With that, if anyone would like to connect with Dr. Carol Miller and find out more about feminist evaluation perspectives, if you would like to know more about the resources that she has provided during the webinar, please do get in touch with her. The email address and her LinkedIn profile web link is available on your screen. So please do get in touch with Dr. Carol. And Dr. Carol is also a member of the CSE Access, Inclusion and Opportunity Knowledge Hub. So if you are a member of that Knowledge Hub, please do also get in touch with the Knowledge Hub, leave a comment or a post, tagging Dr. Carol and asking your question in the Knowledge Hub. I hope you've had the time to note down her contact details, but I think as we come to the end of the webinar, Dr. Carol, would you like to say a few words to summarize your webinar presentation?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Evangeline, and the CSC alumni team for inviting me to share. You know, as you probably can tell, I'm very passionate about this work, and one thing that I think I failed to mention, and I just want to say this in closing, that it's not important whether you call what you're doing feminist evaluation or not. In some contexts, it's not useful to use the term feminist research or feminist evaluation. It will make it hard for you to do the kind of work that you think is important. But this is really values, principle-based, activist advocacy work in the support of, shifting power, however we look at that, and strengthening and building the kind of world where gender equality and women and human rights are really valued and respected. So whatever you call it, bringing those principles to bear on the research and evaluation that you do, and acknowledging that as researchers and evaluators, we all have a role to play. It's our work can contribute to social transformation and justice. It doesn't need to be just describing it. So I just like to end with that, and really look forward to engaging with you. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always interested in connecting with dare I say, young researchers. What did you say? I did my had my Commonwealth scholarship in 1986. So yeah, that was some time ago. Really, welcome any questions, and happy to have conversations with any of you if you're interested in knowing more about the work that I do and the organizations that I work with. Thanks.
Thank you so much.